Both of our speakers today have such incredible resumes. And if I read to you all of their achievements, we'd be here the whole hour talking about that. So this can be a very much shortened introduction for Dr. Cody Pedersen, who's the president of the San Diego School Board. Cody is a native San Diegan. He's on a bunch of boards, including many that focus on the environment and the outdoors. He's, of course, in a leadership role in the school board, but he's also a senior advisor for land use, education, and environment, and manages intergovernmental affairs for San Diego County Supervisor Tara Lawson-Remer. And he's also a lecturer in the UCSD Anthropology Department. I'm not sure how you do all of that, Cody. I've known him for several years, and he is always a voice for reason, for informed information, for compassion, and for inspiration. And just feel so honored that you're here, Cody. Take it away.
Thank you for the opportunity, Wendy, and thanks to everyone here. It is a little bit strange not to be able to see everybody, but I will take it on faith that there are people out there. Um, I'm Cody Pedersen. I'm the father of two. I've got a son at Torrey Pines Elementary and a daughter who just started Muirlands. And following in my footsteps, I came up through La Jolla Cluster and San Diego Unified myself in the 80s, in the bad old days right after Prop 13 dropped 30% from our education budget, and so a lot of us came up in bungalows as a consequence, and wrestling with budget cuts. So we are once again now wrestling with budget cuts. We'll talk a little bit about that. I'll give a brief introduction to the district, and then talk a little bit about what the federal challenges we're facing right now, and then kind of think through how activists or organizing could help support us. So San Diego Unified is the sort of 800-pound gorilla in the room in terms of the San Diego regional education. It is we have about 94,000 students. We have around 15,000. It fluctuates a little bit. We have about 15,000 employees. We're the eighth largest school district in the country, second largest in the state. We have, in my opinion, a strong board, strong leadership team. We've had a little, may have followed. We had a little bit of turbulence over the last couple of years in terms of our leadership. We have a new interim superintendent who was formerly our deputy superintendent for instruction. So she was doing a lot of the work on the instruction side, and she's a quick learner on the facilities side, operations side. So we're excited about that. And she's brought in sort of her team. And we have a whole reformed area superintendent system to help distribute the responsibility and the load in terms of managing our school sites. So if folks have questions about what we're doing on the instruction side or the budget side, I'll just say at the top level, we are facing a 176. This is distinct from anything happening on the federal level. We are facing a $176 million shortfall. Well, we were at the beginning of this year. We had a early retirement program, which had 969 takers, which means that we will be able to manage this some budget cuts without firing anybody. In fact, we'll be hiring people to get through these budget challenges, which is great, but we'll have another 70 million next year. So I think part of this framing of what's happening on the federal side is to think through what's happening on the state side. 94% of our budget comes from the state. In the United States, the vast majority of funding comes from the state and policy comes from the state. And we have about 1,000 school districts in California, which is kind of a unique thing for the United States in general. Most countries have sort of bureaucratic school administration, but almost from the very beginning, we had school districts which ensured the interests and the values of constituents were front and center in terms of determining what the goals of a school district were, what the priorities were. So, and I take that very seriously. Our whole board does, so we're managing that budget shortfall, and we're managing in ways that are ongoing. So we'll get about $150 million of ongoing cuts that will basically addressed a structural deficit, and that way that will carry over into next year as well. So that'll help us on next year's deficit as well. California right now is about 32nd in the country on per pupil funding. It fares even worse when you think about the specific costs of California. It's very expensive to live here for teachers and staff and for families. We're in the bottom quartile in terms of what's considered effort and relative to our per capita GDP. We are in the bottom quartile in terms of how we fund it. Some of that is a lingering effect of Prop 13. Some of it is just that's how we invest here in California. We have over the last 30 years, 40 years underinvested in education for our children and youth. So that's something else we'll have to address in the future. The federal side is obviously concerning. I'll talk about it at several levels. Right out of the gate, immigration caught us, and as well as and now we're getting. I'll talk briefly about Department of Education, but then also what's happening just culturally in terms of because the first things that are hitting us now are students and families who some of whom are empowered by this administration to not be fully aligned with our values as a district. So we'll talk about that as well. So right in come January, we were already wrestling with the reality of an administration that's very hostile toward our immigrant residents here. And Santa Unified has we don't keep this kind of data or collect this kind of data, but 25% of our students are English language learners, about 50% are Latino. We guess that a fair percentage are mixed immigration status families or potentially undocumented families. So right away, we were very concerned about ICE on campus. This country's having Democratic administrations, Republican administrations, there's ongoing attempts to get a bipartisan, common sense immigration reform. That is beyond our purview at a school district. We have really one responsibility, and that is to provide for the safety, physical well-being, emotional well-being, social well-being, academic growth and development of our students. So to us, immigration status is none of our concern, which makes it very clear for us we are here to protect our children. And so right out of the gate, I was on a lot of news channels clarifying what our position is. We had communication with our families and our staff, which is basically that unless ICE agent or other immigration official has a federal judicial warrant, they are not coming onto our campus. We have a set of protocols that we have for each of our school sites for the front office to put right there next to where they engage with the public in case there's a situation in which there is an ICE immigration official at our school site attempting either to get information or to enter the campus. So they have their protocol. If they have a federal judicial warrant, they immediately call our general counsel, who will then come and verify that. We have not had that situation yet. We hope not to have it. And a lot of it is just about assuring our families that their kids are safe here, whatever their immigration status is. I would also say, as we go farther, and we can kind of talk a little bit about what the philosophical questions are, but I did my PhD in anthropology in Peru in the wake of Fujimori and Shining Path and all that. And so I'm very cognizant of what happens when we obviously we're committed to rule of law. We're not going to instruct our staff to violate federal law. And at the same time, we're cognizant of the fact that when you have an administration that is not committed to rule of law and appears to be not providing residents and legal lawful residents and undocumented residents with due process, we have to sort of figure out how to balance the fact that at a certain point, our compliance with the law may facilitate the federal government's lack of compliance with the law. And then you have to kind of think through what that means when you know that your compliance is actually going to be used to violate the rights of in our case, children and youth or their families. So we're kind of heading into some uncharted waters here, and we are trying to plan for those eventualities while remaining calm and hopeful for the best, but preparing certainly for the worst. We have some emerging issues around LGBT students and their families. We are very much committed to our LGBT students. And to affirming that. So we've had a lot of communication with principals in terms of how they can signal that openness and be very cognizant of the fact that a lot of our LGBT students are feeling scared, very scared right now. And so providing additional services to those students and to their families. I'll say I'm going on KUSI tomorrow. I was on three times on Thursday, three different channels on Thursday about this closure, or well, the threatened closure of the Department of Education. Um, we're seeing now they've fired about half the staff. We are already seeing consequences of that, where our Title I funding is going to be allocated about a month late this year, um, just because whatever companies all of you have, whatever wherever you work, if you had half your staff, it would be very hard to provide the services or the deliverables that you traditionally were committed to. So um, there's two separate things. There's one, the Department of Education and its existence or its ability to continue to provide the service it has. Um, its existence will in part be a question for the legislature and then a whole series of legal challenges. Um, but again, once you understaff it, you're already in effect throttling it and its ability to provide services. The ultimate question is what happens to the funding and the programming that the Department of Education has traditionally administered. It could be that other agencies and supposedly other agencies will take that up. But if you read Project 2025, which is kind of a separate conversation, but it is very clear what the ultimate objective is, and that is to really undermine public education more broadly. I mean, yeah, I talked to Amita Sharma last year, and I said, there's a perception that Project 2025 is about relitigating the civil rights era, but it's actually about relitigating not just civil rights, but the New Deal and the American Revolution and the French Revolution. I mean, to read it is a really shocking thing. It's essentially monarchical. It's a very startling, stark vision for America. So we have to be prepared for that. What I'll say right now in terms of impact, about 6% of our budget comes from the federal government. That includes first and foremost, Title I for our unduplicated students, which is our low-income students, foster students, and foster students in foster care system, and our English language learners. That really is part of the funding we rely on to provide those extra services in order to pull those children up and give them the opportunity to overcome a lot of the impediments they may be facing in their own lives. Certainly, I'm come out of La Jolla cluster and one of, if not the most affluent of our clusters. And I can see firsthand the sort of cultural capital, financial capital, social capital, educational capital that families are putting into their kids, families like my own. And when you see the profound inequalities that prevail from one side of our district the north of our district to the south of our district, really, it's pretty spatialized. Many of you know in San Diego, this is a profoundly segregated city, and it may not be formally segregated, but it is de facto segregated through property values and other mechanisms. So time did Project 2025 eventual elimination of Title I, starting with being turned into a block grant. And unfortunately, with block grants, people tend to lose track of block grants, lose constituencies. And so it's really part of slowly tapering off of Title I. The other large elements of that are IDEA funding. I think about 24 million of our budget comes from IDEA funding, Individual Disability Education Act. That is I mean, the federal government in general stiffs districts. They originally implied a commitment to about 40% of special education costs. They provide around 11 to 14% now. So without that, you would see two-thirds of our infant and toddler program for young children with disabilities and supporting their families. That's about 4 million of our 6 million we spend on infant toddler program. So a lot of other funding both grant funding and programmatic funding on the IDEA side. The other is nutrition services, universal school breakfast and lunch. That's about $49 million. We also have impact aid for our military families. I think it's about $13 million for us. I would say, the other thing is it's not just about funding, it's about programming. We are currently under agreement with the Office of Civil Rights um, within the Department of Education, which is tasked with ensuring that we do not have discrimination based on sexuality, gender, ethnicity, national origin, disability status. So, our district, amongst districts, we are well staffed. We have dramatically increased our Title IX office and our commitment to we've professionalized our Title IX response and harassment response in general, in part in response to a Office of Civil Rights investigation, which found this is before my time, but which found profound inadequacies in our system of administering Title IX. And so we've again dramatically enlarged that. But again, we appreciate the fact that Office of Civil Rights holds us accountable. And there are a lot of other districts which have a much more hostile relationship towards civil rights. And without an Office of Civil Rights, a lot of students throughout our country will be really their right to equality before the law will really be threatened, and it will ultimately impact their well-being and their educational growth and achievement. I'm trying to move as fast as I can. Let me tack over to what can be done. This is kind of a question I think a lot of us are wrestling with. Um, my colleague Shane Hayes and I are planning a podcast, and we were on Voice of San Diego and kind of had a fun time. So we're plotting that. But one of our suggestions for the initial one is about leadership, and clearly a society needs to have leadership function, whatever that looks like. And I think right now we're recognizing for various reasons our elected officials are not really leaders per se. We elect them, that we have a very compromised campaign finance system. I know I'm an elected official. It is our system of selecting elected officials is not the kind of system you would design if what you wanted from leaders is leadership in a traditional sense. And so it's hard at this moment in time to kind of think through what it looks like when you have an erosion of rule of law, when your votes don't really matter because you're either a deadlock or you have across the board minorities across the executive branch and executive, legislative, and Supreme Court, unfortunately, as well. So the voting is not your like single vote that an elected official may have is not adequate anymore. It appears that for the time being that the court systems are not necessarily effective. So I think a lot of us are sort of struggling to figure out what it looks like. I think the examples from a lot of these authoritarian turns from across the world, particularly Latin America, is you can either mass mobilize immediately or you can mass mobilize 10 years from now once lots of people have been disappeared and your institutions have been eroded and a whole generation has really been lost. So I think all of us recognize some form of mass mobilization is necessary. One of the challenges is that for the time being, we're kind of far from the immediate pain. One of the organizations that I really would suggest collaborating with is CPD, Center for Popular Democracy, which is a DC based. I flew out there for the Kavanaugh protest to protest the Kavanaugh confirmation, and they did an incredible job of working with a lot of different partners to develop that. I think supporting the mobilization in DC is really, really important because for better or worse, for the time being, they're going to have to bear the brunt of responding to what's happening. Again, I see your April 5th march, and I look forward to participating with that. But I think it's an open question, and if folks have suggestions, I think it's clear that by and large, our elected officials have not been selected for leadership, and it's a little unclear in this scenario. I'll just give a final example before going to questions. I came up through the Bernie sort of. I'm an old Bernie bro, and the last time this happened, but I had this funny moment where I had an old friend from New York, and she's you know Chinese American, private equity, very hard-nosed about things. Her husband's in private equity. She's in private equity. They do crypto stuff. And she texts me. She's like, "Where's San Diego's AOC?" And I was like a little startled for a second because I think of her as kind of like a center-right Democrat, you know? And but you realize what's happening is a lot of Americans are less concerned about the ideology right now and more concerned about people uh, doing exercising the leadership function, charisma, courage, conviction, and a willingness to sort of throw their body on the machine. And so I think this is a moment for us to think through what it looks like to lead through this. And honestly, I think most of the leadership is going to come from people like you from civil society. And so I'm excited to work with you and to help support you in any way I can. And I guess I have some time to take questions, or maybe I don't. Maybe I ate up all my time. So that was fast. I tried to go as fast as I can. A lot of information there.
No, that was great, Cody. Thank you so much. I can't imagine what a day in your life looks like, but I don't think I want to. Um, there were some specific questions about uh, education in San Diego, and one of them was, are there upcoming school board elections or other decision-making moments in San Diego public education that we can get involved in to help?
Yeah, that's it's a little early shaping up the field. I mean, almost certainly the two at Santa Unified that are up for reelection are myself and Shayna. I'm not quite sure whether I'll run for reelection, but Shayna certainly is. But there are elections in school boards all across this region, some of which will be very contested. So it may be useful at some point as we get near or later in the year. It may be good to for me or one of my colleagues to prepare a list of the contested elections and what's who's endorsed by the Democratic Party, who's endorsed by teachers unions or whatever the criteria are, but suggestions about ways we could get involved with elections because certainly 90% of all policy is made at the ballot box. You can do a lot of advocacy, but if you got the wrong person in the office, it's very hard to overcome their wrongness.
Yeah, yeah, that would be great, by the way. Especially because there are some special elections this year that we're getting involved in, but there's not a big federal election this year. And so if there are school board elections that we can get involved in, fundraising, getting out the vote, whatever. I know there are people who would be interested in that. Let me take just it's I'll take one last question, but it's a huge question. And a really important one. And that is, what do we do about the economic disparities in the schools? Is there an answer?
Yeah, I mean, I think that this is really, I think there's at the core of what's happening right now, to me, I mean, there's so many variables, it's really hard to even kind of understand them and address them. But I think two of the core variables is, look, this kind of a Trump election is what happens when you are what I call at a post climax moment. When you have climax like whatever settler colonialism or whatever, and it's 1967 in Disneyland. There's no public facing African American employees, and everybody's white in the pictures, and all your boards are, when you move from that paradigm in which you have a paradigm in which okay, that historical dominant Euro-American population is going to have to share power. Some people do very well with that, and we've prepared ourselves for that, and that's aligned with our values. Other people freak out, and we in California kind of freaked out in back because when we went through the transition with first Reagan like at the high point of the calamity, and then you have Arnold Schwarzenegger, Prop 187, Prop 8. I mean, we had our own little mini freak out, and California, by and large, has gotten past it. But I think America as a whole, that grip on power is just this is that freak out, and I think if we get through this several cycles, people will learn that like it's not the end of the world. We share this country with a diverse population, and this oftentimes also happens at times when you have high levels of foreign-born residents. It certainly happened, with large waves of Southern and Eastern European immigration at the end of the 19th century, beginning of the 20th century, and you have Naturalization Act in 1924, and sort of Americans, or you had and the Irish, the previous cycle. We have these cycles where our hunger for our labor shortage triggers immigration policies, which then trigger large foreign-born populations, which then Americans kind of freak out. So there's a lot of different variables, but a lot of it, there is an element of it that which is about race and power. And then there's the other side of it, which to your question is about inequality. And certainly we are at a incredibly, I mean, we're back to, 1928 levels, robber baron levels of inequality and Gilded Age levels of inequality. And I think everybody in America recognizes something's dreadfully wrong, But at the same time, I don't, I run here in a sub-district that's very affluent, and I frankly don't get a lot of complaints about Title I funding or supplemental funding or concentration funding for low-income students. I've never had a parent ever complain about the things we do to try to address inequity. They do get very upset when the basic functions that they require for their kids are threatened, and that's understandable. I would say we need to do a lot of thinking and messaging around anytime you see a scenario for me in which you're blocked at all levels. I did a lot of environmental organizing. It's very sad. I teach a class at UCC called Politics for Environmental Change with like 8 different modalities. I bring in elected officials and organizers and attorneys and they're all bad news. It's just a lot of bad news. And then when you talk to somebody, Genevieve will talk about racial inequality and economic inequality, and that's a lot of bad news too. So anytime you have a scenario in which you have a lot of bad news on a lot of different fronts and you're stalled on a lot of fronts, I think it's time to pull back and think about what the overarching, whether you call it a spirituality or a vision, it's clear that the overall unifying vision has stalled, and you need to pull back and think, how do we develop and articulate a vision that in a sort of, I, I'm saying spiritual in quotation marks, but it's something like spirituality that like this is wrong. But what is the answer to it? And for the time being, we have people. There's a lot of allergies to folks. What I say about moderate politics is a moderate political agenda is one in which all the proposals you suggest are clearly on their face inadequate to the problem. It's just like, oh, we'll solve homelessness. And it's like you give this tiny little, thing and it doesn't solve it. We'll solve the environment. It's like it's a tiny little thing that doesn't solve it. At a certain point, people tire of you continuously proposing solutions that are obviously on their face inadequate to the problem. So we're going to have to pull back and think how we communicate to the public a vision of the kinds of big lifts on housing and homelessness and the environment and equity. Because without a sort of overarching vision that is convincing to people, we're in some very serious trouble. Sorry, that was long. That was longish, but yeah.
Well, I've heard you speak before, Cody.
I know, yeah.
I I know, but it's wonderful. So we're enjoying, and we probably should have had a whole uh, meeting devoted to you and another whole one to Genevieve. But we also wanted to give people as much information as possible. So there are still some good questions. If it's okay with you, I might ask you 1 or 2 extra questions after the meeting so I can include your answers in the follow-up email, and some specifics even about volunteering in San Diego schools and if that helps, and
Yeah.
Moms for Liberty.
Most
Um,
30, yeah.
so I want people to know that I do recognize your questions, and they're really good questions, and we'll get some more feedback. But I do want to give Genevieve her time as well. But Cody, you're great. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Wendy.
People,
Thank you to everyone here.
yeah, people in the chat were just so appreciative, and so am I. So thanks very much. And I will move on to our next speaker, Genevieve Jones-Wright. who is the executive director of an organization called Community Advocates for Just and Moral Governance. It gets abbreviated as MOGO, and so you will see that a lot. Um, but Genevieve is an attorney, and she tells me she was inspired to become an attorney when she was in the fourth grade, when she heard Thurgood Marshall speak, the Supreme Court Justice Thurgood Marshall. She was a San Diego public defender from 2006 to 2019. And then some of you may remember she ran for district attorney in I think that was 2018. Yes. And then in 2024, she ran for mayor of San Diego. And the fact that we were not successful in getting you into either of those positions is really San Diego's loss. But with your work as executive director at MOGO and so many of the other things that you've been involved in, I know that you are pulling us together in a different way and maybe even a better way. I worked on both of those campaigns, by the way, and believed every second that would have been a great thing for San Diego. Cody talked about leadership of elected officials, and we would have gotten it with you. So thank you for being here, Genevieve, and I will turn it over to you.
Well, Wendy, let me first say thank you so very much. I can't really tell you how humbled and honored I am to hear you speak those words. And I'm always just humbled at the support that I had in 2018 and even now today with the things that I'm doing. We know that the work ahead of us it calls us all. And so I just appreciate you and all the work that you're doing. And so first, let me just start off by saying to Take Action San Diego that I'm really heartened by the community that you all have built here through the incredible work that you are doing. And it really is incredible work. And I think a lot of times when we are at pivotal, critical moments like this, we don't really understand how much of an impact we are having when we're in the trenches and doing the work. And so I just want to say to you all today that being on the front lines against corruption, just fighting, resisting, standing for justice, standing against anti-government forces is what we need to do. And I just want to thank you all for showing up because that is what really matters. And whether you have shown up today for the first time at a Take Action San Diego meeting, or you've been a part of it since the beginning, I just want to say thank you because showing up is so important. So Wendy mentioned that I am the executive director of MOGO. The MOGO comes from moral governance. Our very long name is Community Advocates for Just and Moral Governance. And that name is really by design. When I named us, it was very intentional on my part that community was our very first name. And I really wanted to make sure that we center community in all that we do and being advocates of our community, for our community, and with our community. It was essential that everything be done through efforts that were derived from community. We don't do anything that is for the community or on behalf of the community. Everything from the lawsuits that we initiate down to the Know Your Rights trainings that we do all come from information we get from the community that connect to real issues that are happening. And so if I can just take a moment to just talk a little bit about what MOGO is and what MOGO does, we are an impact litigation organization. We are a nonprofit at 501c3. I tell people that that is just a fancy way of me saying we sue the government. We sue the government in order to change policies and laws. And we launched MOGO in March of 2020. And if you just remember where we were and what was happening around that time, you'll understand the type of work we were just catapulted into. I had a phrase that I put on our website, which was that COVID doesn't discriminate, but the government does. And with the COVID-19 pandemic, we actually saw the inequities be magnified, right? Based on zip codes, based on race. These are very, very real things. And so what MOGO does is we stand with the people because we are all the people, and we work to hold government accountable to all people, but particularly marginalized communities, because marginalized community members are the folks who either don't have their voices heard, or their voices have been stifled, or they're just completely ignored and not at the decision-making table. But we know that when we work on the part of the least of these, as the Bible would say, we know that we bring everyone up. And so our mission really is just to hold government accountable to all people. And so with that, I just want to remind us that the power of the people is greater than the people in power. And that's been the message that I've been trying to share with everyone as of late, because I think that in times like this, where there's always something going on and another fire to be put out, it can be very overwhelming. And sometimes things are meant to just distract us from the real work. But sometimes these little distractions aren't distractions. It is the continued erosion of our civil liberties, of our constitutional rights, but it is all strategy. It is all strategic so that we can get tired, so that we don't translate our anger into something else, so that we continue to just lament or vent, just think that we're powerless. And so I say again that the power of the people is greater than the people in power. And so to really drive that point home, I want to just talk a little bit about power and what that looks like. I don't know if my good friend Cody is still on, but I can tell you that we need you to run again, Cody. Okay. So the first P, the P in power is participate. We know this. Everyone on this call knows we have to participate in our local, state, and national elections. A lot of people are talking about midterm elections next year. We know that we have some significant primaries happening as early as April 1st, where we have the chance to really flip the structure of and the power of our House of Representatives with some of the vacancies and the resignations that we've seen in Florida. We see one coming up in New York if a Trump appointee is confirmed. We know that it's happening in Arizona. We know that Texas has to fill a seat. So we have to either maintain Democratic seats or replace those Republican seats that are now open with a Democrat, right? And I don't want to get partisan here, but we do know that there is a MAGA agenda. And I want to just say, Wendy, I felt like I didn't need to speak after you talked about what it is that should be the priorities for this particular group, because as you talked about, we have got to disrupt the MAGA agenda. And a big way of doing that is to get them out of power. And one thing that we have to understand is that there has been this agenda, and it has been working, where they want to take the seats of government from school boards all the way up to the White House in order to have influence over our governing institutions at every level. And this is why we need people like Cody in place at our school boards. But this strategy involves recruiting and electing candidates who share a specific conservative nationalistic vision and put them into positions of power. And so we know that when we vote, when we use our voices, we actually influence who has those seats. And so we cannot sit back and say that a certain position doesn't matter, because this is literally how they get the foothold on our institutions. And I don't need to tell it to this crowd, but I have to say this. We are dealing with folks who are anti-government leading our government. I never, ever, ever thought that I would actually see this. When I named us community advocates for just and moral governance, people pushed back against that and said, well, do you really expect for our government to be moral? I mean, just think about that. But I would have never imagined that we would be in a place right now where all of our hard-fought victories are under attack, where they're trying to roll back the very things that make us who we are as Americans, that we're vilifying public servants, that the people who are holding public office and who are supposed to be public servants are vilifying and demonizing public servants, and they're tearing apart our institutions. So this is a very special moment that we have to rise up and do something about, which I know this is the crowd to do it. Take action. This is what we're here for. But our very first step is shaping our future by participating in local, state, and national politics and elections. So the P is for participate. And Cody, your participation is staying in that seat. O is for organizing. We have to collaborate strategically with our fellow community members, and we have to fight for democracy. Again, we are in a special, when I say special, I'm not talking about it in a positive way, in a special time where democracy and the very foundations of our democracy is being dismantled. And so we have to collaborate together. And I just spoke to a group this week and I told them to take a look at you all's website, because a lot of times we feel that we are the only ones working and we're by ourselves. And that's another trick, to think that we're doing it alone, that we're in silos. And I told this group, please take a look at the website, because you all have these wonderful resources and tools showing us that there's governors who's fighting against these anti-democratic efforts, that there are other organizations that we can join with. We don't have to reinvent the wheel. We can join your boycott. We can do things together and join and amplify the forces that will actually defeat the MAGA agenda. So O is for organize, and W, as you know, very well, we have to wield our economic power wisely. Our dollars matter. And so websites like goodsuniteus.com lets us know how companies align with us politically. I'll tell you this story very briefly. Some years back, I went into Sam's Club and I asked for my membership money back. And the young lady said, well, why do you want to do that? And I said, well, because Sam's Club is a member of ALEC. She had no clue what ALEC was. And I was able to talk with her about how ALEC sets agendas in our legislation. And it's more than just lobbying. It is them implementing the harmful policies and laws that we've seen in recent years. But I say all that to say that a lot of people thought that the 40-day boycott of Target or just boycotting Target wasn't going to do anything. But let's look at the effects of that and what Target has said as they project year-over-year profit loss. If this continues and is sustained, it matters. Our dollars matter, and we have to use our fiscal power to send messages home. Let's look at the Tesla takeover movement and what that is doing. And so we have to wield our economic power. We cannot say that there is no impact. I always look at the Montgomery bus boycotts and that 381-day boycott and all of the changes that came from that. People standing together and saying, we are going to impact this local bus system. And from that, we can see all of the gains that came from the civil rights movement with just that action. So I just want to say that we are proving every day that economic pressure can force accountability. E, educate. We got to spread the word. We've got to share information with our community members about our rights, about our efforts, and about the issues that are facing us. I see a lot of people who are having regrets over their votes. It's not the time to shut them out. It's not the time to shun them. It is the time to bring people in and say, okay, let's rectify what you did and join in the resistance. And then the R is resist. We have got to stand up fearlessly. We've got to stand up relentlessly against injustice, no matter where it is. And this is so important because, as Cody intimated and as Wendy said in her own way, we know that when it happens over here, it's going to happen over there. No one is safe. And so we cannot afford to let injustice prevail in any area. When we see it, we have to act against it. We have to proactively resist, and we have to defend democracy. And it's not the work of just one person or group, it's all of ours. So we need to unite, we need to act, and we need to create a future where justice and dignity and democracy prevail. So we know that the fight's not over, right? We know that the fight's not over. And I'm trying to speak very fast, but I'm here to give you a call to action. The call to action is to join with my organization at a community education summit. We're calling it Vision 2025. And Wendy has been so gracious to say she will lend her voice in educating community members. We know that the Project 2025 is at our doorstep. We know that there was a commitment from the Trump administration to put 2/3 of the majority of Project 25 into existence through policy in the first year of Trump's presidency. This is a very real thing. And so, again, to echo what Wendy said, we have to do more than just talk about the problem. We have to do more. We have to actively prevent this agenda from advancing any further. And so that is what the whole premise behind this Vision 2025 Community Education Summit is. We are going to analyze, we're going to convene together, and we are going to take action. So ACT. And I love acronyms. If you have not noticed, I love a good acronym because I feel like it's just a powerful way to drive a point home. And so we're going to act. So we're going to come together as a community, and we're going to figure out through brainstorming, through think tanks that we make up, how we're going to stop this harmful agenda from taking root. How do we prevent more of this dangerous ideology from becoming further entrenched in the laws of our society? And what are the answers that lie in our actions that we can take up right now to engage and to resist and to push back against injustice? That's what we're going to be doing and talking about at this summit. I want to say that it is so important for us to, yes, lament, vent, do all of that, but then get up and figure out proactively what our vision is for the society we want to live in. I have to say this again. We have to cast our own vision, and we have to have a vision that is built on our ideals and on our ideas, our voices, and our shared experiences, because we have to rebuild the foundations of our democracy. And we have to come together as a community to cast the vision about the world we want to live in and the communities we want to live in. So, as a final call to action, I want to just say that I am personally extending an invitation for you all to join us. It is going to be this spring. Looks like it's going to be the last Saturday in May. We were originally going to do it on April 17th, but there is a progressive labor summit that day, and we do not want to split groups. We know that much of the same people who would want to come together as a community to talk about how we fight against Project 2025 and the MAGA agenda will also be at the Progressive Labor Summit, and we want as many community members as possible. So we're looking at Saturday, May 31st. Do not fear, that is not Memorial Day weekend. So please join us. I'm going to put a link in the chat if I can. It is an interest form so that you can get on the list to get more information about the details as we get them and to get the formal invitation. But we invite you to just come together as the community we are, to brainstorm, to think critically, and to craft a vision for our future, for the future of our society, for the future of our region, for the future of our state, for the future of our nation. And I know that we have the answers together. So we want to give you the platform to give voice to your ideas, to collaborate with others, to share in community, and to shape the blueprint for the world we want to live in. And with that, Wendy, I'm going to give you back over the proverbial microphone.
Thank you, Genevieve. I think you can all see why everyone always wants Genevieve Jones-Wright to be a speaker at their rallies and at their conferences, because you are inspiring and positive, and wonderful. So thank you, Genevieve. We did put the link in already, so you don't have to do that unless we got it wrong somehow. But let me see what questions we have. Well, it actually kind of goes back almost to something Cody said. How do we get our current elected officials to take better leadership, to speak out more, to make more public um, declarations about what they're going to do, what the problems are, and what they're going to do about them?
I'm going to say this. We need better elected officials. Let's be very clear here. We have a lot of people who are supposed to represent us who don't. They represent special interests. They are in it for the power. They're in it to stay in the seat that they have. They're not in it to actually do what needs to be done. So I'm just going to say that very first controversial thing, that some people need to get out of office and we need to replace them with people who are not going to cower. I think this goes back to us needing to change campaign financing. It goes back to us figuring out how we take money out of politics in the way that it is currently, so that we can actually have representatives who represent us and they don't have to worry about making someone mad in order to be victorious in their next reelection, right? And that's the thing. How do we get people who are really about the change that is needed? We hear the rhetoric during campaigns, but we don't see it in action when they actually get into those seats for the most part. Now, we do have some amazing folks in office in our region. And I think that when they take the hard stances, we also have to rally behind them, because a lot of times they're taking hits and they're doing it without any sort of public support. And I think that it is critical that when people stand up, like a supervisor, Monica Montgomery Stepp, and they challenge things and they put forward policies, that we show the support and we don't necessarily wait until it's time for a vote, or that we don't remain silent because it's not a popular thing or we think that it's going to lose based on who makes up the body. So we have to show the ones who are speaking up that we do have their back. And so that's what I will say as it relates to that.
Hey, and Caleb asked, would you recommend setting up citizen policy working groups to address some of these major problems?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yes. And that really has to be one of the primary things that happens. When I was president of our local Black Bar Association, the Earl B. Gilliam Bar Association, I did a summit. And one thing that was really critical in us producing an agenda that we ended up giving over to an elected official to implement, and I won't go there. But anyway, we had some movement there. But the thing that really got us to that finish line with having an actual agenda that was functional, that was effective, was getting community members together and having folks work in their areas of expertise to then figure out what policies were missing, to figure out what we needed to have in policies, to then give over to elected officials to implement. And so I say that to say we can't collaborate, we can't work unless we do that very thing, because it can't be one person at the front of the room just because they're a lawyer saying, I have the answers. No, we don't have the answers. The answers lie in people with lived experience, people who work in these areas. And the only way we can actually craft a vision is when we get together and say, let us draw up the policies, and doing that in a group, not with someone standing with the whiteboard and telling you what needs to happen. So yes, that's my long-winded way of saying, absolutely, that is exactly what we're going to do at the summit, but we also have to do that beyond in other settings about other things.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, I think we all look forward to that. I've been sort of lobbying some of the Democratic clubs to step up and take some of this type of activism as well. And there's some clubs that are a lot more activist than others. So, working through the Democratic Party, which we had a question about, um, I think I think we need them. I think we need to get them to take more leadership than they have been taking. And it's one avenue for sure. But I think also it's very likely that they will end up following the lead of people like you, Genevieve, and people like all of us, rather than them initiating on their own. I hope I'm wrong about that, but we'll see. Yeah. Yeah. So thank you so much. There are a few outstanding questions, but I think we got the key ones, and we're definitely looking forward to that summit. We want to participate as individuals and as a group. I'm really excited to hear more about it as time goes on. And thank you for doing that. Thank you for being here, and thank you for everything you do.
No, thank you. And if I can just say this really quickly, it is important for us to push back against our elected officials when they don't do the right thing. And so I want to be hopeful along with you, Wendy, that they will respond to our leadership when there is none there. I'm looking at Chuck Schumer, I'm looking at I I won't even go there, but I did see a mention of another elected official in the chat. And what I will say is this: when our local Congress people, Scott Peters and Juan Vargas, voted the wrong way as it related to HR 9495, community members got together, pushed back, and said, you need to reconsider that vote if it comes back to you. And then they did the right thing. So again, the power of the people is greater than the people in power, and they understand who their constituents are. So if we push hard enough and we let them know where we stand, if they do the right thing, they will reverse course, they will correct themselves, and then do better. So let's push, let's keep pressuring.
That's great. Thank you again, Genevieve.
Thank you.
And
Thank you.
thank you. We'll see you soon. And what I am going to do, you're getting, beaucoup, brilliant, hardworking, wonderful comments. So, yes, thank you. Take a look at the chat. It'll make you feel good. And I'm going to go back to sharing my screen. And that, I think, in my presentation, I'll answer a few more of the questions that people have been asking. So, upcoming actions and events. First one I want to talk about is April 5th. This, as most of you probably know, is a nationwide call for rallies, protests, sign wavings, whatever it is, but all on the same day, and all with the theme of hands off our services, hands off our rights. It was initiated by the national group Indivisible, but now, 50, every day there's more organizations adding their names to this effort. And here in San Diego, we formed a coalition of several progressive groups. We are adding on to that daily also to organize a rally in downtown San Diego at the Civic Center at noon on April 5th, which is a Saturday, and I hope you all can make it. The hope is that it is the largest local demonstration here and all around the country since Trump 2.0 invaded our lives. And the basic mission of the rally is to support our democracy, support our freedoms, our jobs and our essential services, all of which are under attack by the MAGA agenda. There are actually demands associated with this rally: an end to the billionaire takeover and corruption of the Trump administration, an end to slashing federal funds to Medicaid, Social Security, Medicare, and other services that people depend on, many people, for their survival, and an end to the attacks on DEI, immigrants, trans people, and other communities. So that's the core mission. In San Diego, what we are also doing is every speaker we have, every tabling event we have at this is going to be oriented around what you can do after the rally. Because I think many of us have been to rallies that are wonderful and we feel great. And then we go home and it's sort of like, now what? Okay. We don't want people to feel that way after this rally. So it's a big part of what we're doing is the next steps after the rally. And of course, we talk about that here all the time. How you can help with the rally. Of course, showing up and bringing as many people as you can think of is a number 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 top priority. We want you to, if you do come, to make signs and maybe bring 1 or 2 extra signs with you to give to other people. Larry is going to put in the chat a link to a kind of a graphics library that people have been creating. It's growing every day, but it will give you some good ideas for signs and graphics you can use making those signs. You can have a sign writing party with your friends. Just don't get too drunk, or else the signs will look funny. But yeah, definitely bringing signs, making signs. We will have extra signs there, but it's one great way that you can participate. We also want to promote this as much as possible and get the word out as much as possible. And of course, social media is one of the main vehicles for doing that. So if you see anything about the Hands Off rally, please spread the word in social media to your friends and whatever. But one sort of underused way we can promote this is by letters to the editor of the San Diego Union Tribune. And a number of people here in the audience today have had great success writing to the Union Tribune. It's not incredibly difficult to get a letter into that paper. It's hard to get into the New York Times, not so hard to get into the Union Tribune as long as your letter is well constructed. And Larry's going to put into the chat a letter writing toolbox or toolkit that we developed to help you get that letter published. But the idea is you always have to write a letter that references some story that's been in the paper recently. And of course, there are stories every day in the paper about services being affected by the MAGA agenda, whether it's veterans' health care or people worried about their Social Security checks or people with green cards getting deported, whatever it is, you'll be able, unfortunately, to find a story to begin your letter with, but then wrap in the fact that, for people, I'm so glad that there's a way for me to voice my concerns about this. And one of the best ways you can do that is by showing up April 5th at the Civic Center. So hopefully people will consider doing that. I think we need to pepper the paper with those. And on top of everything else, it will motivate them to get a reporter there because the Union Tribune has not been great about reporting on some of the protests that we've had so far to date in San Diego. If you know of partner organizations that would like to support this, please let me know. You will have my email as soon as I get this follow-up email off to you today. We'd love to know that. And this will be a list that keeps getting longer over time, but the 2 other things I'll say is there is a trolley station right by the Civic Center. So if you can, please take public transportation. There's people actually organizing fun groups to go down together to the rally. Bring a water bottle so we don't have to have a bunch of plastic water bottles. And that's it for now. There were a few hands being raised. If you have a question, if possible, stick it into the Q&A and we'll get to it in a second. Also want you to know that we have a protest calendar on our website. It's a collaborative effort among a bunch of different San Diego progressive organizations. And we started this because of the plethora of protests going on all over San Diego County. We wanted there to be one central place. There's more than one, but at least one central place where people can go to find out what's going on. We try to vet each one of these so that we know the organization sponsoring it, we know the reason it's happening, so you can feel relatively comfortable you're going to something that's going to be well run. So check out that protest calendar. Check out also our website on actions other than protests, which we also keep regularly updated. And a few of the important ones. And before I forget it, it's because it's not in my presentation, but Brian asked about the county supervisor race that's occurring April 8th in South San Diego County. I personally am supporting Paloma Aguirre for that spot, and I will add some information in my follow-up email on that to all of you. And I apologize for it not being in the presentation. April 1st, there is a critical election in Wisconsin. Many of you have heard about it. It is a Wisconsin Supreme Court election. Elon Musk has now donated millions of dollars to the MAGA guy that is running against Susan Crawford. He's also paying people $100 to sign a fake petition that's actually just a way of getting their names and then paying them to vote for the Republican. He has business interests in Wisconsin that he is interested in getting in his favor. And of course, he's also supporting the MAGA candidate. So this is a national test, not just about what happens in Wisconsin, which is very important because it's a swing state and the Supreme Court has a lot to do with the way elections are run, but also because it's a bellwether for the country. And when politicians start seeing people like Susan Crawford win by a landslide, it makes them all think twice. So there are options on our website, and it'll be in my follow-up email for you to contribute to. You can still write some letters or postcards to voters in Wisconsin. You can also make phone calls there. So that's an important one. Another important one that's coming up is November, Virginia, the governor and the state legislature. We don't know who's running in the state legislature yet, but we do know that Abigail Spanberger is running as the Democrat there. She has a fantastic background that is progressive, but also in law enforcement, which is a very nice combination. And we'll be doing a lot to get her elected. We also want you to sign up for our next meeting. This will be another Zoom meeting, April 26th, and it's going to be happening after the April 5th rally. It's going to be happening as we adjust more and more each day to this new reality that we're living in and do a better job each day in figuring out what our best response can be to that. And it seems to me that end of April is a good time for that reassessment. So we'll be looking at the year so far in a very compressed and synopsized way. We'll look at how goals and tactics have changed and which ones we think are going to be most effective going forward. And we will be inviting leaders from some of the most active groups around San Diego to contribute their thoughts on how we can be most effective going forward. So I think it will be a great meeting, and I hope you will sign up for it. Finally, because the news is also terrible, and there's no denying that. But I also want to highlight some of the good news and some of the news just in the last week that makes me feel that the tide is beginning to turn. It hasn't turned fast enough. It's not big enough yet, but we have everything from the Supreme Court Justice John Roberts criticizing Trump. We have Wall Street leaders beginning to get panicky, as they should be. We have Republicans trying to hold town halls and finding that their audience of voters, not all Democrats, but just voters who are concerned and worried and frightened and feeling that this isn't what they voted for when they voted for Trump. And finally, you have Bernie Sanders and AOC drawing crowds of 20,000, 30,000, and 40,000 in red and purple states. Okay, that's meaningful. The tide is turning. We need to keep the momentum up, whether it's protesting, whether it's writing letters, whether it's making phone calls, whether it's writing a letter to the editor, whatever it is, the momentum is building and we're all part of it. And I thank you so much for being part of it. And I look forward to seeing you April 5th. And I will stop sharing my screen just so you can at least see my face and see me thanking you again for being here, for all of your good questions. I will try to answer some of the ones we didn't get to in my follow-up email. And stay in touch. Stay in touch with me anytime and just hang together. Take good care of yourself and see you April 5th. Bye, everyone.